I hadn't planned on going to the cabin that weekend. I hadn't packed a bag, made a list, or even checked the weather. But on Friday afternoon, something gnawed at me. A quiet hum of unease behind my ribs, like my bones were whispering that something was wrong. So I drove. No music, no calls, just me and the winding mountain road, the grey light of late autumn dripping through the windshield. The cabin came into view like it always did, nestled at the base of the ridge, flanked by skeletal trees, wrapped in memory. But something was off. The gate, usually chained shut when I wasn't there, hung wide open. Gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up. That's when I saw it, her car, a white Subaru, carelessly parked like it belonged there. Tessa's, the one she'd begged our parents for during her second semester at college, back when she'd flunked out of art school and decided she was meant to be a wellness influencer instead. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, got out slowly. There were footprints in the frost-crusted grass, 2 sets, a wine bottle on the porch railing, a hoodie, my hoodie, slung over the rocking chair. The door was unlocked. I didn't knock. I couldn't. Laughter spilled from inside, familiar, high-pitched, infuriating. I stepped into the kitchen and there she was, my sister, barefoot, pouring wine into one of the hand-blown glasses I'd bought in Santa Fe. She wore my robe, the blue one with the stitched moon phases down the sleeves. Her boyfriend, I never learned his name, was lounging on my couch, scrolling through his phone like he'd paid rent here, like I hadn't spent half a decade scrubbing this place clean of grief and turning it into a home. Tessa, I said, my voice too calm, a still pond before a stone drop. She turned like I was the one who didn't belong. Oh my God, Jules, we weren't expecting you. Mom and Dad gave me the key, said I could use the place whenever I needed to clear my head. She said it like I should be grateful, like the generosity of our parents somehow included giving away the one thing that was truly, legally, spiritually mine. You needed to clear your head, she shrugged, oblivious to the fury slowly rising under my skin. You're never here, and this place is too pretty to be empty. Plus, you know how hard things have been for me lately. I looked around. My art had been moved, my canvases pushed into a corner. A new speaker dock blared, lo-fi beats under her voice. My grandmother's quilt was missing from the reading nook. Did you touch my studio? We just needed more space for yoga. You really should try it, Jules. You hold so much tension. I couldn't speak, not without screaming. My mouth opened, closed. The weight of so many years, of being the eldest, the reliable one, the good daughter, settled on my chest like wet snow. I turned. I walked out. Outside, the cold mountain air cut sharper than I remembered. My breath hitched. I drove away with frozen fingers and a heart splintering at its seams. Behind me, laughter floated out the windows like smoke from a burning home. The gravel crunched beneath Julia's boots as she stepped out of the car. The old cabin nestled in the pines, looking just as it had in memory. Weathered, sun-silvered, and hers, or it had been. She stood a moment, wind biting through her jacket, fingers stiff on the steering wheel, even though the engine was off. The silence felt too whole, like the breath before something breaks. It was Tessa who had asked her to come. Not even a call, just a voice note, breezy and bright like always. "Hey, Jules. I thought we could go through Grandma's stuff this weekend, you know, memory lane and all that. I'll bring wine. You bring the key." As if Tessa didn't know Julia lived here now. As if she hadn't moved out because of what their mother said last Thanksgiving. Casual and cruel, like flicking ash off a cigarette. "You've had it to yourself long enough, honey. Maybe it's time to let your sister enjoy it too." That was the thing about their family. No one ever said anything outright. No demands, no accusations, just suggestions, implications, that slippery language of guilt where fairness always meant sacrifice, her sacrifice. Julia walked up the porch steps, the boards groaning like they knew her weight. The house smelled of cedar and turpentine. Her old paint still stacked neatly by the window. She had painted here, lived here. This was where she had found herself again, after the long, shapeless years of caretaking and giving. She had watched her father die slowly, fed him, changed him, sat up nights listening to his ragged breathing, while Tessa sent texts from Bali and posted sun-drenched selfies. And when he was gone, it was Julia who had packed up the house, sorted the debts, held their mother's hand. Tessa flew in for the funeral and left the same night. But now Tessa wanted the cabin. Inside, the fireplace still held the ash from her last visit. Tessa hadn't arrived yet, of course. Julia wandered into the small bedroom with the quilt their grandmother had sewn. Blue cotton squares, faded now. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence close in again. She remembered summers here. A teenage Tessa, screeching about mosquitoes, stomping around in pink flip-flops, begging to be driven into town to find civilization. Julia had stayed behind. She always did. She kept Grandma company, painted in the long gold afternoons, and learned to love the stillness. Her grandmother had understood, not with words, but with gestures. Extra honey in her tea, a hand on her shoulder, the bequeathing of this cabin without discussion. "You keep this," she'd said. "It's not for everyone." Julia had wept after the will was read. Not for grief, for recognition. The screen door slammed. She heard the clatter of heels on the porch before the voice followed. Bright sing-song. "Jules! I brought Chardonnay and those goat cheese things you like. Did you start the fire yet?" Julia took a breath and stood. She walked back into the living room as Tessa breezed in, all city chic and undone curls, the cold trailing in behind her. "God, this place smells like pine and old books," Tessa said, kicking off her boots. "It's like a freaking Instagram filter. I love it." She twirled, arms wide. "I mean, we could do so much with this, right? I was thinking maybe we could Airbnb it when we're not using it. Split the profits." The words landed like ice water. "We?" Julia stared. "This isn't yours." Tessa blinked. "Excuse me, it was left to me. Grandma made that very clear." Tessa gave a little laugh. "Oh my God, you're seriously going to get territorial. Jules, come on, you've had it for years. It's not like I'm asking you to move out. You already did ask that." Tessa shrugged, unbothered. "That was Mom's idea. And honestly, you're always so intense about everything. It's just a cabin." "No," Julia said quietly. "It's the only thing anyone's ever acknowledged me for. The only thing that was just mine." Tessa rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." And there it was. The great invalidation. A lifetime of it, condensed into 4 words. Julia sat down, hands curled in her lap. She didn't speak for a long time. Tessa wondered, talking about furniture swaps, and maybe knocking out a wall for more light. Julia let her talk, let the space fill with fantasy. Then, "Do you remember when I paid your tuition?" Tessa paused, blinking. "What? You couldn't afford your last year. I gave you my savings. Told Mom and Dad I didn't need help with my rent." Tessa was quiet now. "I gave up grad school to stay with Dad. I missed 10 years of painting. 10 years. Jules? No, let me say this." Her voice was steady. "You gotta go. You always got to go." I stayed. I cleaned up. I soothed Mom. I took care of everything. Tessa looked down, suddenly small in the fading light. "I didn't know it hurt you so much. You didn't want to know." That silence again. But now it was different. Charged. Not peaceful. "I'm not giving it to you," Julia said. "And I'm not sharing it. This place isn't a reward. It's restitution." Tessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Julia stood. "You can stay the weekend if you want, but this is my home, and I'm done apologizing for it." That night, after Tessa had gone to bed, Julia stood on the porch with a mug of tea. The wind moved through the trees, and the stars blinked cold above her. She remembered her grandmother's hand on her cheek. This is not for everyone. No, it wasn't. But it was for her, and finally she believed it. Julia held her phone in shaking hands. The screen lit up with her mother's name. She had avoided this call long enough, but not today. Today, she would finally say something. The call connected, but it was silent for a moment. Just her mother's, breathing on the other side. "Mom!" Julia's voice cracked despite her resolve. "Oh, Julia," her mother said, her voice thick with weariness, as though she'd been waiting for this moment, but never wanted it. "What now?" Julia took a breath, steadying herself. She had rehearsed this. She had prepared for this. But the words felt foreign in her mouth. "You know why I'm calling," her mother sighed, and Julia could feel the dismissal already, an invisible wall rising between them. "It's just a key, Julia. Really, this is so dramatic. Dramatic." Julia's chest tightened, her fingers curling around the phone, nails digging into her palm. She fought to keep her voice calm. "It's not just a key, Mom. You're giving the cabin to Tessa. You're letting her take everything. My history. Everything I've done here." "You've always been so dramatic," her mother said again, her tone dismissive, tired. "Why are you making this into something it's not?" Julia felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her. "Something. It's not. I'm not making anything up," she insisted, her voice rising despite her best intentions. "This is my life's work. This cabin, this place was the only thing that was ever just mine. I gave up everything for you, for Tessa, for Dad, and now it's being taken from me." Her mother sighed, the sound long and irritated. "You're being selfish." Your sister needs a place to breathe, Julia. She needs a break. You know how hard she's been struggling." Julia blinked, trying to hold herself together, but the words were a punch to her gut. "I've been struggling too. I've been here for years, and no one has ever acknowledged it, Mom. You've never acknowledged it. You've always been so strong," her mother said, the words coming out like a sigh of resignation. "That's why we never worried about you. You don't need the cabin. You don't need anything really. I needed this." Julia's voice broke on the last word. "I needed you to see me, to see what I've sacrificed." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long silence that stretched out like an ocean between them. Her mother finally spoke, but there was no softness in her voice. "I'm not going to listen to this, Julia. You've made your decision. You don't need a cabin to remind you of your sacrifices." And then the call ended. Julia stared at the screen, her heart beating so loudly, it drowned out the ringing in her ears. Her chest felt hollow, and for a moment, she couldn't even breathe. The words echoed in her mind. "You don't need anything. You don't need a cabin to remind you of your sacrifices." She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the phone across the room. But all she could do was stare at the screen, watching the little dots of the group message she'd just sent, each one like a needle, threading deeper into her skin. She had sent a message to the family, asking for boundaries, for clarity. Her finger hovered over the screen as her thumb typed, "I just want to be seen. I want my history respected. This is the only thing I have left." But then her thumb froze. There was a notification. Tessa had responded. She clicked it, a laughing emoji. Julia blinked. She stared. She didn't even know how to process the numbness settling over her. How something so small and dismissive could feel so devastating. Laughing. She's laughing. Her sister had always been this way. Light, free, oblivious. The world spun on her axis, and Julia had always been the one to hold it steady. But this wasn't light. This wasn't freedom. This was a fracture, a wound in her soul. She closed the phone, her hands shaking again. And then, with a force that was almost mechanical, she started the car and drove back to the cabin. The cabin was quiet when she arrived. The pines whispered in the wind, and the porch steps groaned underfoot as she walked up. Her heart beat hard. In her chest, she didn't know what she expected to find, but this wasn't it. The door opened with a creak. Inside, everything was wrong. Her paintings, her life's work, were shoved into a black trash bag in the corner of the shed, abandoned and forgotten. Her grandmother's quilt, those soft, faded squares she had draped over her shoulders when she'd first come here, had been replaced by a gaudy faux fur throw. The shelf where she had kept her books, her sketches, her little bits of self, was empty. The house was hollow. A chill crept through her, and her fingers trembled as she stepped further inside, eyes searching for anything familiar, anything left of her. But there was nothing. Then she saw it, on the fridge, a note scrawled in sharp, childish handwriting. "You're being selfish. You don't even come here anymore." The words burned through her, each letter a lash across her skin. She stared at it, her vision starting to blur as the tears came. Selfish. How could they say that to her? After everything, after all of it, she had given up her 20s for this family, her own self, for them to just... Julia's knees buckled. She collapsed to the floor, hands pressing into the cold linoleum, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This wasn't just about the cabin. It wasn't about the quilts, or the paintings, or the memories. It was about something deeper, something that, until this moment, she hadn't fully understood. She wasn't just being erased from the cabin. She was being erased from everything. She had been the good daughter, the responsible one, the caretaker. But it wasn't enough. No one had ever seen her, not really. Not in the way that mattered. Her history, her art, her soul, it was nothing but a nuisance now, a burden to be shed. It wasn't about what she had given. It was about what they had taken without even realizing it. She wasn't enough for them, and maybe, in this moment, she realized that she never had been. The tears came harder then. She crumpled further, her breath ragged, choking on a sob she hadn't let herself have in years. For all the years she had given, had bled for them, it wasn't enough, and no one was coming to save her. The apartment was emptied out in the span of a single weekend. Julia had thrown away most of what wasn't essential, subletting the space to someone who needed it more than she did. The quiet, familiar rhythm of city life had begun to suffocate her, like a weight that pressed down harder every time she stepped out the door, every time someone called her name. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. Not her parents. Not Tessa. Not a single soul. She left a note on the kitchen table, a short, cold message to her landlord about the sublet and the key. It was all she needed to say. No goodbyes. No explanations. She boarded the bus to the coast with only a suitcase, a box of her sketches, and the remnants of a life she could no longer claim. Her phone stayed in her bag, turned off. She would let it collect dust for now. The town was everything she hadn't expected, and everything she needed. Cold, wind-blasted, unforgiving. It wasn't beautiful in the way that postcards and travel magazines like to depict places. It wasn't soft. There were no winding streets with cobblestone charm, no cafes with patios bursting with flowers. This was a place where the sea was an overwhelming presence. Rough, unpolished, distant. There was no hurry here. The people moved with the same slow, resigned rhythm of the waves, content to remain just as they were. Julia rented a small, weather-beaten cottage at the edge of the town, one of those places where the landlord didn't ask many questions. The walls were bare, the floors creaked underfoot, and the kitchen was small enough that she never bothered to use it. She didn't need much, just a place to sleep, a place to breathe. Each morning, she would walk along the beach. She'd pull her hood up against the salt wind, her fingers numb, and stare at the sea that stretched endlessly, a dark rolling mass. It was the kind of place that could swallow you whole, where the horizon was a blur, where it felt like the land and water were conspiring to erase you from everything, and that was exactly what she needed. She started collecting shells and stones, the smooth, polished ones that had been shaped by time, by water. Every day she would walk a little further, her eyes scanning the ground, searching for something to hold on to. She began to sketch again, Simple things at first. The way the waves hit the shore, the curve of the cliffs, the way the wind carried, the scent of salt and earth, and something ancient. The silence at first felt unbearable. There was no chatter, no background noise of city life, no one needing her, no one calling her name. It was as if she had slipped off the map entirely. The isolation, the quiet, pressed in on her, a constant reminder of what she had left behind. But then, over time, the silence began to settle into something softer, something sacred. She woke to the sound of the ocean instead of an alarm clock. The days blended together, not in a haze of forgetfulness, but in a kind of rhythm she hadn't known she was searching for. The wind became her companion, the sea her confidant. Every sketch, every stone she collected became a small offering to this new life. She stopped thinking of herself as Julia, the daughter, the caretaker. She was just a woman now, just a body moving through the world with salt in her hair, color under her nails, and nothing to prove. And for the first time in years, that felt enough. It was on the second week, when the rain had turned everything to mud and mist, that she met Marin. She was sitting at the small cafe at the edge of town, trying to work up the courage to step outside and walk along the cliffs. The wind was relentless today, and the sea was in one of its stormy moods. The walls of the cafe were warm, the air thick with the smell of brewing coffee, and something sweet, something cinnamon. Marin came in like a force of nature, the door slamming behind her as she entered, shaking off the damp with a sigh. She was older, with silver strands in her hair, and her coat was worn, well loved, like everything else about her. Her eyes were sharp, but there was a softness there too, as if she had seen the world and made peace with it. She ordered coffee with a brief nod to the barista and took a seat at the table across from Julia. "New here?" Marin asked, her voice low and curious. Julia blinked, startled, but nodded. "Yes, I'm just passing through." "Ah!" Marin smiled, leaning back in her chair. "A lot of people come here, and a lot of people leave. You might just be one of them." The words weren't threatening, but they hung in the air with a certain weight, as if she understood something that Julia wasn't ready to say. I think I might stay," Julia said quietly, watching the rain streak against the windows. Marin studied her for a moment, her gaze unflinching. Then without another word, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small sketchbook, placing it gently on the table between them. "I own the gallery here," she said, as if that explained everything. "I see you walk by. I see your work. You're not passing through." "Not really." Julia looked down at the sketchbook. It was battered, well worn, and when she flipped it open, the pages were filled with charcoal sketches. Raw, unrefined, full of life. She saw the same ache in the lines, the same hunger to be. "Do you—" Julia started, but Marin interrupted her gently. "No advice, no pressure, just space. If you want to show your work, you can. If not, that's fine too." She smiled, her eyes warm. "There's something in you, girl. I can see it. But I won't ask you to talk about it. Not yet." Julia swallowed. For the first time in weeks, her throat didn't feel tight. Weeks passed. Julia visited the gallery once a week, carrying new sketches in her bag. Sketches she'd never dared to show anyone before. The work felt freer now, lighter. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't trying to fit herself into a box. She was just creating, and it was enough. Maren took the sketches without question, hung them on the walls, and even sold a few. No name, no pressure, just the work, just the art. Julia didn't need to be Julia anymore. She was simply a woman with paint on her hands and salt in her hair, and the gallery filled with her work, slowly, like the rising tide. People came and went, but no one asked her who she was or where she came from. They only saw the art. Her identity wasn't tied to her family anymore. It wasn't wrapped up in her past. It was untethered now, free. She had slipped off the map, and in the process, she had found herself, and that was enough. The journals smelled of mildew and lavender. Some were bound in cracked leather, others in cheap spiral notebooks, their covers covered in stickers or smudged fingerprints. They sat in a cardboard box in the corner of the room, silent until Julia dared to disturb them. She opened one, the blue one with the frayed ribbon bookmark, and read 2 pages before slamming it shut. Her handwriting looked foreign. The words sounded like they belonged to someone else, someone scared, shrinking, always apologizing. Julia held the journal in her hands a moment longer before walking it outside to the fire pit. The pages hissed as they caught flame. The ribbon, curled, blackened, disappeared into ash. She didn't cry, not anymore. She just sat on the porch, arms around her knees, and watched the fire turn her past into smoke. That night, she burned 4 more journals. The rest she stacked in 2 piles. One marked keep. The pages where her voice had tried, however faintly, to fight. The other pile, thicker, was labeled chains. She would burn them too, when the timing felt right. She wrote letters in the early morning while the world was still silent. Letters to Tessa, to herself, to the version of Julia that had curled into herself like a wilted flower under Tessa's shadow. None of the letters would ever be sent. That wasn't the point. She wrote them to get them out. The sorrow, the anger, the unsaid. I used to mistake your silence for safety. One letter read, "Now I know silence is just another kind of scream." The writing made her hands ache, but in a way that felt good, like pulling thorns from under her skin. You ever think about doing something with all this? Maren asked one afternoon, setting down a mason jar full of iced coffee beside Julia's sketchbook. Julia looked up, a pencil tucked behind her ear, charcoal on her fingertips. Doing something like what? I saw the painting you left out yesterday, Maren said. The one with the cabin and the door. It knocked the wind out of me. Julia flushed. It's nothing. It's not nothing. It's truth on canvas. Maren tapped her phone and pulled up a web page. There's an artist in residence program in Maine. 3 weeks. No fees. They're taking applications. Julia hesitated. I've never shown anyone my stuff. Not really. Then it's time. She applied 2 nights later, long after Maren had gone to bed. She didn't tell anyone. She uploaded 5 images and wrote an artist statement with trembling fingers. The last line read, "My art is not documentary, it is memory. It is what trauma feels like, not what it looks like." She almost didn't click send, but she did. The acceptance email came 10 days later. She stared at it for so long, the screen dimmed. Then she read it again. And again, "Accepted," she whispered, the word aloud, as if testing how it felt in her mouth. Accepted. The cabin in Maine was different from the one in her paintings. Smaller, older, tucked into the woods like it belonged there. The light was golden in the mornings and silver by dusk. Her room smelled of pine and paint thinner. She worked every day, canvas after canvas. Sometimes she painted until her fingers cramped. Sometimes she didn't speak for hours. Not out of fear, out of focus. Her art changed. She stopped painting what had happened. She painted how it felt. A woman sinking into a red velvet chair that swallowed her whole. A rib cage made of cracked porcelain. A girl with no face, standing before a cabin door, holding a burning key. One piece showed a woman pouring ink over her shadow. Another, a mouth sealed shut by a chain of pearls. Her palette darkened, then lightened, then exploded with golds and ochres. Pain didn't leave. It transformed. She didn't try to explain it. She let the paint speak, and it did. Halfway through the residency, a visiting curator asked to photograph her work. A week later, an editor from an art magazine reached out. Julia blinked at the message. "We'd love to feature your work in our upcoming issue on emerging voices. You can remain anonymous if you wish." She stared out the window for a long time before answering. Then she opened a blank document. The words came like a flood, clear, sharp, unapologetic. She told her story, not with names, but with truth. She wrote about how it started, how control can be gentle at first, how it feels to be erased piece by piece, how it takes years to realize you were living in someone else's script. The article published 2 weeks later. She didn't check comments. She didn't need to. Back home, the air smelled of spring and soil. The fire pit was cold, the porch light flickering. Julia unpacked her canvases and leaned them against the studio wall, one by one. Maren hugged her long and tight. "You look different," she said, like someone who just came back from a war and won. Julia smiled. Maybe I did. She didn't go online much. But one afternoon, her cousin Leah texted her a screenshot with a single word. The photo showed Tessa, smiling in front of the cabin, her cabin. The caption read, "Weekend retreat, my little slice of heaven." Julia stared at the image for a full minute. Her old self might have dropped the phone, might have sobbed, might have let the rage rot her from the inside. Instead, she exhaled, slow, steady. No anger, just readiness. She pulled out a fresh canvas that night, painted the cabin again. But this time, the woman stood with her back to it, a trail of ash behind her. In her hand, not a key, but a brush on fire. People started reaching out after the article, some anonymous, some not. One message read, "Your story helped me name mine." Another, "I saw myself in your faceless woman. Thanks. You for painting her. Julia saved every message in a folder called Truth. The whispers spread. Old friends messaged. A neighbor asked if she'd be willing to display her work at the local gallery. One letter arrived by mail. No return address. Just a typed note. You're braver than I ever was. She did it to me too. Julia didn't cry, but her hands shook as she held the letter. Maren found her that evening, standing barefoot in the yard. You okay? Julia nodded. Yeah, just thinking. About what? Julia looked up at the sky. How silence used to be my shelter. Now it feels like a cage. Maren stepped beside her. So break it. She booked the gallery space a week later. No title. No fanfare. Just a name on the flyer. Julia. And underneath, a reclamation in paint. People came. They stared. Some cried. Some didn't say anything. Just stood, still and reverent, before the burning key, the sealed mouth, the brush on fire. Julia watched them, quiet and steady, the way a mountain watches the storm. And for the first time, she felt whole. Not healed, not finished, but whole. The gravel crunched under Julia's boots. As she stepped out of the car, the air was thinner here, cooler than she remembered. But maybe that was just her skin, shed and reformed. The trees leaned overhead like silent witnesses. But the wind made no judgment. It just moved. The cabin sat where it always had, nestled into the curve of the mountain like it belonged to the forest, more than it did to her family. Paint peeling on the shutters, the wind chime still twisted in the breeze, though it no longer sang. Julia paused, hand on the front door, and inhaled. She expected panic. It didn't come. She turned the key slowly. The door creaked open. The cabin was empty. Dust floated in the morning light like suspended breath. No voices, no footsteps, no familiar clatter of Tessa pacing in socked feet. The silence wasn't eerie. It was still, like the pause before a brushstroke. Julia stepped inside. The floorboards remembered her. Each step carried echoes, not of fear, but of moments, little ones. Laughter once, whispered secrets, midnight toast in the kitchen with her sister. Before things turned sharp, she moved room by room, touching nothing, but reclaiming everything. The couch, where she used to curl into herself, the mirror, where Tessa once critiqued her smile, then her weight, then her existence. The pantry door still creaked. Her fingers trailed along the windowsill, where she once watched the snow fall and pretended she was somewhere else. But she wasn't pretending anymore. This was her memory, her story. And she had returned not to relive it, but to release it. She made tea, just like she always had, green. No sugar. She sat at the old oak table, the one that still bore the dent from a dropped cast iron pan and the faint burn mark from a careless candle. She placed everything carefully in the center. A copy of the title deed, now legally in her name, the will from their grandmother, naming Julia sole inheritor, a neatly printed copy of her published article, a cease and desist letter signed and sealed by her attorney, and last, a small brass key, not to the cabin, to something else entirely. She folded her hands and waited. The sound of tires crackling up the driveway came just after 1 p.m. Voices followed, familiar ones. Her mother, clipped and practical. Her father, humming under his breath. Tessa, loudest as always, laughing at something only she found funny. The front door swung open, mid-conversation. Then froze. Her mother blinked. Her father stood still, confused. Tessa's smile faltered. "Julia?" her mother asked, voice already edging with discomfort. She didn't rise. "Hi." A long silence. "What are you doing here?" Tessa asked finally, sharp, defensive. She stepped forward, almost as if to block the table. Julia looked her in the eyes. "I came home," she said. "One last time." Her father recovered, first, stepping in cautiously. "We didn't know you were—" "I didn't come to talk," Julia interrupted gently. "I came to say what needs to be said. Then I'm leaving." Tessa scoffed. "Is this about the article? Really, Julia?" "You don't get to dismiss me anymore." The words were steady, not loud. Julia's voice didn't shake, but the room did. She gestured to the documents. "This cabin is mine. Legally. It always was. You ignored the will because it was convenient. You stayed here, took photos, claimed it as yours." "That's absurd," Tessa snapped. "I took care of the place. You abandoned it." "I survived," Julia said. "There's a difference." Her mother opened her mouth, but her father touched her wrist. Julia continued, "The article is anonymous, but I know you read it. You just didn't recognize me in it. Or didn't want to." Tessa crossed her arms, lips pressed into a thin line. "You're being dramatic. You always were." "I was silent," Julia said. "That's not the same thing as dramatic." She turned her gaze to her parents. "You let her shape me into something small. You watched. You called it sisterhood. You called it tough love." Her mother's mouth trembled. "We didn't know. You chose not to know." Julia's voice wavered for the first time. Not with fear, but with grief. A grief she'd already lived through. A grief she'd outlived. "I'm not here for an apology," she said softly. "I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm just here to tell you, I see myself now, and I don't need any of you to validate that." Tessa stepped forward. "Julia, come on. I'm done," Julia said, standing. "You don't get to speak over me. Not anymore." She slid the cease and desist letter forward. "This is real. The next time you post photos claiming this place is yours, there will be consequences. Legal ones." Tessa's face turned red. Her father looked down. Her mother stared at the documents, as if they might vanish. Then Julia reached into her bag and placed the key on the table. "This doesn't go to the cabin," she said. "It's for a safety deposit box. Inside are letters, photos, things I wanted to say. You can read them, or not. That's your choice." She looked at each of them in turn. "I'm done trying to be heard by people who only listen when I'm quiet." The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was hollow, like the house knew something sacred had ended. Julia turned toward the door. No one followed her. The drive down the mountain was smooth. The sun filtered through the trees, and birds sang above her windshield, like nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had. Julia didn't look back. Not at the cabin. Not at the porch swing. Not at the people inside who once defined her. She had no rage left. Only space, only breath, only the fire of her own truth. Steady, glowing, hers. Later, at a gas station an hour down the highway, she stepped out to stretch. The wind was warmer now, the air softer. A woman at the next pump smiled at her. Yulia smiled back, simple, human, free. She reached into her glove compartment, pulled out her sketch pad, flipped past old drawings, landed on a blank page. With the corner of the pen between her teeth, she thought. Then she began to draw. A woman walking, away from a house. No flames, no wreckage, just footsteps in the dirt and wildflowers blooming behind her.